Hello and welcome to Switched Up Ministries. My name is Melinda and it's great to be back with you. The last couple of sessions have been me preaching away and they were really great sessions about the character of God. And I know we'd talked about those already, but it was really lovely to do them in a church setting and to talk about them in a slightly different way. It's always a little bit different to kind of podcasting, to sermons. So even though it was some of the stuff that we had covered, I hope that you're able to be blessed by it. The last one that was up last week, we actually started looking into some characters. We looked at the character of Abraham, and today I want to continue some character work. We've done a lot of talking about God, and it'd be really great to get into some stories and some characters and how those characters also interacted with the character of God and what it meant for them. So today we're going to do that, and probably for the next few sessions we're going to have a look at some of those characters and some of the characters in the Bible and what their life looked like with God and sometimes without. But to start our session today, I'd really like to pray with you. This topic and this talk about the character of God and how it can relate to our lives is really important. And so I want to pray and ask that we all can have a really calm, peaceful time and learn a little bit more about God in this session. So if you just be quiet with me wherever you are, in the car or at home, just be quiet in your space, and then we can pray and ask God to reveal to us what He wants to do today. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for this time that we can just have a moment with you. We may still be busy doing something, but we're very grateful that we can turn on our phones or our devices and listen to your word and the stories about your love and your character. Thank you for the learning we've done so far. Thank you for the opportunity I have to speak at other places and to just spread your love. And as we talk about a character today, I pray that you will open our hearts to see how we can know you a little bit more through this story as well. Thank you so much for all that you have done. In Jesus' name, amen. Now here at Switched Up Ministries, we've talked a lot about topics. We've talked a lot about the character of God. We've delved into, our first couple of sessions were about Ephesians 3. We haven't really talked about many characters. So for the next few weeks, I would really love to dive into some characters in the Bible. Some that you may have heard of. The one today you may not have heard of, and that's okay. But all the stories through the Bible are there as examples to teach us, to help us grow more in understanding about God. And so we are going to, look at some characters, and I'm really excited about this. And it's interesting because as I've gone through this year, I've been thinking about the characters that I wanted to bring to you. Some big characters, Joseph and Esther and King David, and they are not the ones that I'm even remotely close to thinking about yet, because where our journey has taken us into some really interesting places, including the characters that show what I'm trying to say, I guess. When I was preaching at a church just recently, I had my talk ready to go about one of the characters in the Bible, Abraham. And when the lady got up before me to talk to the kids and do a little kids segment, she actually brought to light another character. And while I was waiting to go on and listening to the children's story, I thought, my goodness, this character also is showing something about God and what his knowledge is about the character of God. And I thought we can't go past this. So I ended up putting it into the sermon during my talk, and it worked pretty well for having a last minute inclusion. But I wanted to expand on it today. The characters that we talked about on that sermon talk were Abraham. He was our main character, and I will get back to him because he's a very important character in the whole biblical story. But the other one was a man named Naaman. And we're going to delve into his story today, and the story kind of surrounding the characters of this story, because there's a number of people involved, and those people all have choices to make, and they all have ideas about who God is and the character of God, and it shows really well in this story. So I thought we could delve into that today. And the story can be found in a book in the Bible called 1 Kings. Now, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of background if you're not familiar with biblical stories. There is a lot that happens in the Bible before this story. A lot. This story is actually quite small in comparison to some others. And there's a lot that has gone before this story of Naaman. His name is Naaman. There's a lot that's gone before this, and we don't have time to delve into all of it. It would take us a year to go through it all. So, very quickly, essentially there is a people that God has specifically set to tell the world about him. So he's given them instructions, he's given them lots of information, and he said, tell the world. And so these people, they're called Israelites, they do it and then they struggle with it. And then they do it and then they struggle with it. And during some of those struggles, God had to not forget about them or ignore them or say, so sad, too bad, but to let their consequences, natural consequences, happen. And one of those natural consequences was that neighboring countries, I guess, and kingdoms would come in and essentially take over their towns or their cities. And so this is the story of a man from a different country who was not part of God's chosen people to tell the world, but he was of a neighboring kingdom. And he had gone to one of the cities and basically killed people, taken slaves, caused havoc. And he brought back with him a slave girl to be essentially a maid for his wife. So the Israelite people were kind of in a place where they were struggling a little bit with their own faith. They were meant to be a group of people to show God's love to the world, but they were struggling themselves with who God was and how to live that life. And so this is where the story picks up. There's also another character in this story. His name is Elisha. Now, Elisha was what the Bible calls a prophet of God. So he was essentially like a minister, someone who led the people spiritually. And he went around the people and around the nation, and he would preach to them and he would support them spiritually. And God gave him abilities to heal, abilities to do miracles. He was really closely connected with God, and he was able to do a lot of the things that God required of him because of his faith and because of his relationship with God. So this is another character that we're going to head into. There was lots and lots of prophets in the Bible, and this particular one was called Elisha. So we're going to have a look at this story. It's found in 2 Kings. So, yep, there's two books called Kings. There's 1 Kings and there's 2 Kings. And it's all about the kings. Pardon me. I need to slow my talking down. That's why I yawn, is I talk a little bit fast. These books in the Bible talk about the kings of this nation, Israel. They talk about what happened to the kings through history. It's like a little history book. And it talks about what the kings were like, what the kings did in relation to their relationship with God, and then what they did with their kind of nation as well. So this is the second book. Okay, so there's already been one. This is a second book, and we pick it up in chapter 5. Now I'm going to start reading little bits and then we'll kind of talk about them. But let me just start with the first one. Okay. The king of Aram had great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army, because through him the Lord had given Aram great victories. But through Naaman he was a mighty warrior, but he suffered from leprosy. So Naaman was the commander of a neighbouring kingdom's army, but he suffered from leprosy, which in biblical times was a terrible, terrible disease. At this time, Aramean raiders had invaded the land of Israel, which is what we talked about before. And among their captives was a young girl who had been given to Naaman's wife as a maid. One day, the girl said to her mistress, "I wish my master would go and see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of leprosy." So this young girl, taken as a slave, working as for Naaman's wife, she said to Naaman's wife, "I wish my master would go and see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his leprosy." So Naaman told the king what the young girl from Israel had said. "Go and visit the prophet," the king of Aram told him. "I will send you a letter of introduction for you." So Naaman started out carrying his gifts, 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, then 10 sets of clothing. The letter to the king of Israel said, "With this letter I present my servant Naaman. I want you to heal him of his leprosy." So this is really, really interesting. They have conquered this place. They have gone and they've sacked it essentially. And they've taken slaves and they've taken prisoners and they've probably taken a lot of this silver and gold. And yet the word of this young girl, Naaman talked to the king and the king gave his blessing to go. I find it really interesting about what's going on, because I think there's a lot going on in this story that we're not told, and I'm fully just implying this just from reading between the lines. But this young slave girl was very, very brave. Brave to talk up to Naaman's wife, but also brave to talk about her God and her religion. Because in these kind of ancient times, I guess you could say, each country and each area had their own god due to whatever they believed in and what was going on in their kind of space. So for this girl to keep the faith and to speak up about her faith and this prophet was really big. But what interests me as well is that Naaman's wife listened. Now, what would make a powerful woman, if she was a commander's wife, she was in very high regard, very high in the classes, why would she listen to a slave girl? What about this girl, we don't know how old she was, okay, just as a young girl, why would she listen to this young girl in the first place? Now, there can be lots of thoughts about that. Maybe the young girl was just brave and spoke up regardless of what might happen to her. Or maybe she had shown herself to have really good character. And so that when she talked up, the wife listened because she had shown herself to be worthy and trustworthy in all that she did, so why not with this information? We're not told any of this. But it's very, very interesting that this young girl spoke up either out of bravery or because she had earned the respect of Naaman's wife enough that she could be very honest, and then Naaman's wife knew she was only doing it out of love, out of a character of kindness. It's a very interesting little part there. There's no answers to that, but we can see through this, and if we read between the lines, that something has happened between these characters, between the wife and the little girl, that has created a bond or a trust enough. Either the Naaman's wife trusts the little girl because of her character, or the little girl also knows that Naaman's wife is a kind woman and can trust speaking up. Either way, there's two characters here that have played a very big part in this story. And a part because their own characters, especially the little girl, has shone through so much that the adults took notice. The commander of the armies, his wife, they took notice. And the king, because Naaman went to the king and said, this young girl from Israel told me. So the king as well. These people have trusted this little girl. Amazing. Amazing. And her upbringing before she was brought into slavery was very, very important. Important in that she knew God, she knew the character of God. She also knew Elisha and what he'd done, and believed that God, through Elisha, could heal. She'd obviously seen it before, or maybe heard about it before, or met the prophet. But she believed in the character of God and the character of Elisha, and she wanted to help out of the kindness of her heart. She didn't ask to leave or change jobs. She just told him about the prophet. So Naaman took his gifts and went to the king of Israel. Now, the king of Israel read the letter. He tore his clothes in dismay and said, "This man sends me a leper to heal? Am I God that I can give life and take it away? I can see that he is just trying to pick a fight with me." So the king of Israel did not believe what was going on. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes in dismay, he sent a messenger to him. "Why are you upset? Send Naaman to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel." So Elisha gets the news and asks the king to send Naaman to him. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger out to him. "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan. Then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of your leprosy." So Elisha sent his servant out to the front door, and he told Naaman to go and wash in the Jordan River. He told him to wash 7 times. Then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of your leprosy. So Elisha told Naaman what to do through his messenger. Verse 11, but Naaman became angry and stalked away. "I thought he would certainly come out to meet me," he said. "I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of God and heal me. Aren't the rivers of Damascus and Abana and Pharpar better than these of Israel? Why should I wash in them and be healed?" So Naaman turned away in rage. So Naaman expected something different to happen. He expected Elisha to essentially do all of the work. To come out, what does he say? He says, wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of his God. So he expected something a little bit different. And maybe something that he'd seen in his own country through the priests or the people in the temples of their own gods. This is how we heal. We wave our hand over and that's how we heal. But it wasn't about Elisha healing or doing anything. It was about God healing and Naaman doing something. Naaman had to move. Naaman had to make a choice to do this thing. It wasn't just Elisha that had to do it. So Naaman went away in a rage because he didn't get it how he thought it should be done. And that's a big challenge for us, that we don't put our own thoughts or expectations on what should be done with God. Because God does things in His ways because of His character and reasons that sometimes are a bit beyond our understanding. But we can come in with our own concepts of what should be done and how, but it doesn't necessarily make it the right way. And we can get a little bit annoyed when we don't see it go that way. And this is what happened to Naaman. He wanted a magic wave hand, and it didn't come. But his officers tried to reason with him and said, "Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he says, 'Go and wash and be cured.'" So Naaman went down to the river Jordan and dipped himself in the river. So his servants actually were like, "Why are you raging? It's a pretty simple thing that you need to do. If you had been asked to do a massive task, would you have done it? He's just asking you to go in the river." And you can see that Naaman, his heart softens and he understands what he's done. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Yeah, if that's the thing that heals me, well then why not? So Naaman went down to the river Jordan and dipped himself 7 times, as the man of God had instructed him. And his skin became healthy as the skin of a young child, and he was healed. There's so much emotion, so much going on in this story, probably more than I was expecting even before I brought this to you today, forgetting little things in it. Every character plays a role in this, from the messenger of Elisha to the, what do they call, the officers of the commander. They all play a role in how this story unfolds. And these officers, they have seen all of this happen too. They have heard what the little girl said. They heard that the king told him he could go. They've heard the king. They've heard that Elisha's told him what to do. They have seen and heard these stories as well and gone with Naaman on this journey. And they can see that such a small thing is very simple and can be a big impact for Naaman. And Naaman does it. He goes into the river, he dips in 7 times, and he's healed. He's healed. In verse 15 it says, "And Naaman and his entire party went back to find the man of God. They stood before him, and Naaman said, 'Now I know there is no God in the world except in Israel, so please accept my gifts.' But Elisha said, 'As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept any gifts.' And though Naaman urged him to take the gift, Elijah refused. Then Naaman said, 'All right, but please allow me to load 2 of my mules with earth from this place, and I will take it back home with me. From now on, I will never again offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. However, may the Lord pardon me in this one thing. When my master the king goes to the temple of the god Rimmon to worship there and leans on my arm, may the Lord pardon me when I go.' 'Go in peace,' Elijah said. So Naaman started home again." So this is a really interesting kind of conversation. I see here 2 men, very, very humble in their approach to each other. Naaman wants to thank Elisha. We want to do that when something amazing has happened to us and someone else has played a big role. We want to thank them. And so I don't think it was wrong that Naaman did this, but Elisha didn't need those gifts. He said, I don't need the gifts because it wasn't me who healed you, it was the Lord. It had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with God. And then Naaman says, well, please allow me to load 2 of my mules, so donkeys, with earth from this place and take it home with me. He wants to keep this memory close. He wants to keep the holiness of where he's been close, as a memento, as a place that he can have back and remember this time, because he's coming from quite a far way. And then he says, from now on, I will never again burn offerings or sacrifices to any other God but the Lord. And he says this, which is really interesting. He says, however, may the Lord pardon me in this one thing. When my master the king goes to the temple of the god Rimmon to worship there and leans on my arm, may the Lord pardon me when I bow to. So it sounds like he has to go with the king sometimes into their god's temple. And if the king orders, well, you go, especially as a commander. And you go, and he said, please just pardon me that I have to go and do this thing. I'm doing it for my king. I'm not bowing down to that God. I am doing it for my king because he's commanded and he is my king. I think that's beautiful because he is not, he's asking for forgiveness, obviously, but he knows that he's going to have to serve his king, and he's willing to serve his king, and he's willing to still be a man of honor and kindness to people around him, but he's not acknowledging the God in there anymore. He's not acknowledging that God that the king's worshipping is worth worshipping anymore, and he wants to worship the true God. And Elisha says, go in peace. So Naaman started home again. I wonder what that home welcoming would have been like. Not only for Naaman, but his officers too. His officers and the people, his entourage, they had all witnessed this. They had heard Elijah speak to Naaman. They had heard Naaman's heart, Elijah's too, I guess. They had seen this character of Elisha to say, I don't need anything. I don't need your money. I don't need your gifts. I'm just grateful that God did this for you. He didn't need any of that. And the officers are watching this, and they're exposed to a person that probably thinks very differently to them. They might be a bit money hungry, or the people in their country trying to get the status and the wealth and the position. And here's a man who says, I don't need that. I don't need that position. I don't need anything, actually. I just need you to be happy now. And then they see Naaman, who their commander, this strong, raging man. I'm sure the rage that he did earlier was not his first one. They see him humbled into a servant for his own king, but also a servant for this new God that they're just learning about. And they're seeing this transformation of character. So not only is Naaman coming home to a worried wife and a servant girl, but so are the officers and all of the people that are involved. And then what does Naaman do? He's going to go to the king. And he's going to tell the king. They're obviously friends. If he went to him about his illness and they go together to worship, they're more than likely friends. And he gets to go and tell his friend about God. He's going to go back to his homeland and witness to other people about the saving power of God. This is a Beautiful, beautiful story. The characters in this story, they're all at different levels of understanding God and the character of God. If we look at the little girl, I would suggest that she probably knows a lot about God and knows a lot about character, especially if she has had something to do with Elisha. If she knows that Elisha can heal and she's had something to do with him, something's happened in her world where Elisha's been involved, she knows that God is working through him. God's character is shining through Elisha, and Elisha's character is an example of what God is. And this little girl in her mind, her childlike mind, is seeing that. And because she knows that about God, her character is also in a certain way. She probably knows that God will never leave her or forsake her, and for her to trust in the Lord, He will always be there. And so when she's gone through this hard thing, I would suggest that she has kept trusting and kept trusting and kept trusting and her character has been displaying the character of God as well. But I want to talk about Naaman very, very briefly. Naaman did not know anything about God. The only thing he knew, and he wasn't even sure he knew that at the beginning because he only heard about Elisha, but the only thing that he kind of knew about God was that he healed diseases. That was kind of the only thing he knew. He knew there was a people that worshipped this God, and he knew that they were being conquered and different things, but he didn't actually know about God probably. And so through the little girl and through Elisha, the only thing that he knew was that God could heal. Now I want to have a look at a verse in Matthew. This is actually Jesus talking now. And he's talking about a difficulty that his disciples had in healing someone. And he ends up healing the person, and the disciples were like, I don't understand. Why couldn't we do the healing? What was going on? And Jesus says this. So this is in Matthew 17. 17? Yep. Matthew 17 and verse 20. It says this. You don't have enough faith, Jesus told them. I tell you the truth. If you have faith, even as small as a mustard seed, you could tell this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. So let me read that again. So this is Matthew 17 and verse 20. You don't have enough faith, Jesus told them. I tell you the truth. If you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to the mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. Now, why I bring out this verse is because when we're talking about the character of God, the more we get to know the character of God, the more our faith also grows in our ability to trust Him, to live with Him, to go through the things that we can go through with Him. But Jesus says, faith as small as a mustard seed. Now, mustard seeds are pretty tiny. I can't even get my, like really tiny compared to some other seeds. So Jesus is saying you don't have to have a lot of faith to be able to step into a life with God or what God's calling you to do, or just to be with Him. You don't have to have a lot. Now, if we think about Naaman, he hardly had anything. He had a very tiny amount of faith that God would heal him. In fact, he actually thought it was Elisha that was going to heal him. But the officers talked him around and said, well, maybe this thing is actually not such a big thing. So Naaman walking into that water and dipping 7 times, his faith was so small. His understanding of God's character was so small. And yet, he still did it. All he knew about God was that God could heal. That's all he knew. And he stepped into the water. We don't need to have a massive amount of knowledge about God to step out. Because you look at what happened to Naaman. He did that. He had that tiny bit of faith and he stepped into that water, and that faith then multiplied very quickly because he then understood that character of God so much better. And through then what Elisha was saying to him, that it's not about money or gold, it's just about believing in God. He then understood a little bit more about God. And he was able to understand just a little bit more and then step out probably again and talk about his faith. And he still probably didn't know a lot. He probably knew that God was gracious, merciful, a healer, but he probably didn't know much more than that. And he still was able to go back and tell people about God and his saving grace. And maybe he even went back and learnt from the little girl a little bit more. I don't know. I hope so. That'd be lovely, wouldn't it? But Naaman didn't have a lot. And I don't think it is wrong to say that if you only know that God is a God of patience, that you can move and step out in a relationship with him. If the only thing you know about God is he is kind, I think that's enough to make a move, to step into something. If the only thing you know about God is that he is not going to berate you, he is not going to hate on you, but he is going to support you and build you up, then you can step into a life with him, or stepping into something he'd love you to do. If the only thing you know is God is love, but you don't understand that, because in Ephesians that we've looked at before, it says the love of God passes our knowledge and understanding. If we only know that God is love, but we don't know what that means, we can step out. We can make a choice forward in a relationship with God or into the purpose God has for us. We don't have to have all of our ducks in a row and all of the knowledge of this and everything together. Because if we take the example of Naaman, he had the smallest amount of understanding about the character of God, that God heals. That was all he had, and it was a very small amount of God heals. And he stepped into that water and God blessed him, not with things, but with understanding and with knowledge about God's character, and with a faith that he then could go back and tell others. Understanding the character of God does not have to be this massive, big journey that we have to get to. We tick it off and, I'm there now, I've arrived. It is a constant strengthening of our inner selves, like it says in Ephesians, a constant strengthening of, oh, God does that. Oh, and God's character is like that. And look how that worked in my life. And look how that worked in that person's life. It's just constantly shifting and moving. And we don't have to start with a lot. We only need a very small amount to step into the life that God has given us. And he will bless and multiply and show us more and more and more. I think that's great. It's great news, because we don't have to try and understand everything, because A, we won't, and B, there's a lot. But God says, that's all right. Just step into that water. Just have this much faith and step in. And I will do the rest. I will bless you. It's a good story. And it's a beautiful story about the character of God, the character of people coming together, and how then God has blessed that. Thank you for joining me today. Next time we'll look at another character who goes through something a little bit trying as well, or actually a lot trying, and we'll talk about his understanding of God's character and what that means. But in the meantime this week, have a look. 2 Kings chapter 5. There's also a few good stories kind of past that as well, some fun little stories. But chapter 5 in 2 Kings, to read the story of Naaman. And thank you so much for joining me today, and looking forward to our next session as always. Thank you.